So I decided to do this anti-spirituality seminar. I think about 2 or 3 months ago, and I wanted to do it because I really couldn't find any other person of color, any other Black woman, any other woman for that matter, that spoke out against spirituality as a whole. I've never seen any woman kind of speak about spiritual capitalism, the issues that some people have with New Age, twin flame, demons, all of these things. I just couldn't find that content anywhere. I did find atheist content, but along with atheist content, I always found that for the women who claimed to be atheists, they were also spiritual. And to me, that really never made sense, because if you don't believe in the spirit of God, then how can you believe that human beings have a spirit? So I always found myself kind of searching, and I just couldn't find anything. So when I can't find something that I'm looking for in regards to content, I then therefore go out of my way to make that content, because if I'm thinking of it, there has to be other women out there who are also thinking about spirituality the way I think about it. The going trend or the programming is that we all have a spirit. There is a God, there is a devil, there's Satan, there's angels, there's also demons. And that's just the going trend. In every culture, with every religion, we're always going to hear about these delusions, in my opinion, that we can't prove and we can't see. So the seminar that I'm working on goes, deeper into that. But for the purposes of this live today, we're just going to talk about the satanic panic and the origins of all of the fears that we have as women. And I wanted to kind of speak about a little bit on demons. I wanted to speak about Satan. I wanted to speak about God a little bit. And I think these discussions are good to have, because I don't see anyone else of color really having these discussions. Again, a lot of women claim to be atheists, and they claim to be anti-Christianity and anti-Catholicism and anti-Islam, but then they spill out tarot cards in front of you. They claim to be anti-Bible, anti-King James version of the Bible, but then they'll talk to you all day about demons existing. Where do you think these ideas of demons came from? If not King James and the order that he put out to manufacture that Bible, then where do you think that you get it from? If you claim that you believe in demons and demonic activity and dark entities, that came from a man. All of that came from a man. And in regards to our lifetime, we could say that King James and his version of the Bible put that out there, along with his demonology series that he put out. Not a series, but a book. And I think he put out demonology before he did the Bible. I think it's before or after. I have to check. I'll put it in the comment section what the dates that he put out demonology and the dates that he put out his version of the Bible. And I'm only doing this content for fun, because it's a fun discussion to me. It's also good to kind of have this historical grounding in where Satan comes from, where the fear of Satan comes from, where the fear of evil comes from, and how that's always been associated with women, and how it's always been associated with these concepts that are not based in reality. So you can't, again, in my opinion, claim that you're so above it and spiritual and holy, but then yet you're claiming to acknowledge demons, and you're claiming to acknowledge things that you don't have proof of. You can only see another human being's behavior. So for example, someone would do something crazy. They would unalive someone, hurt someone, and instead of you taking that information about that person and what that person did, a lot of the times people blame that activity on demons. And the reason why I love the satanic panic and that time period in the 1980s is because we have to go back to the serial unaliver. And the serial unaliver also knew at the time what was happening, because a serial unaliver was a part of, human culture. They weren't always in prison. They lived in society. And when they lived in society, they were also susceptible to what other human beings were susceptible. And that includes media. That includes anything that was going on in newspapers, television. So when we talk about these serial unalivers and their behavior and associating human behavior with demonic activity and satanic worship, we have to get to the conclusion that there's a reason why all of that happened. So we're going to get into it, but I wanted to talk about like the most important movies that came out at the time period in the 1970s. And this is before I was born. So the movies that came out that you're going to hear about in this live that I'm doing, because it's going to be pretty long, but we're going to talk about The Omen. We're going to talk about Rosemary's Baby, of course, The Exorcist, and we're also going to talk about, what is the other movie? The Omen, Rosemary's Baby, The Exorcist, and there's another one that's from the 80s, but it's called Poltergeist. And all of these movies kind of played into the rise of the satanic panic and how powerful imagery is. A lot of the times when you hear people and they talk about demons or they talk about possession, they usually are talking about things that they've seen before. Even when you hear people talking about NDEs. And if you don't know what an NDE is, that's a near-death experience. It's always the white light. It's always the family member that they haven't seen who passed away 20 years ago. It's always Jesus. It's always heaven. It's always Mary, Joseph, and the angels. That's because that has already been said. It's already been done. It's already been talked about. And we internalize a lot of the things that other people put out and that they do. Movies are no different. So in regards to the satanic panic, all of these movies came out, and a lot of them, a lot of the producers, a lot of the people who put into a lot of money into making these films, these were religious men. We're going to talk about William Blatty. If you don't know who William Blatty is, we're going to get to it. And we're also going to talk about the repercussions or the effects of the satanic panic and this belief in demons and how it actually harmed an entire community in 1980, I think 1985 to, I want to say 1989, because the trial that I'm going to be reading about, and I'm going to give you a full read on this trial and how this was the most expensive trial in American history. So I think it's good to kind of have that historical grounding so that you can kind of say, the next time you hear someone talking about demons, you can say, well, actually, this is where that thought pattern and those beliefs come from. It comes from this time period and that time period. It's good to kind of have knowledge, because when you have knowledge, it's going to be really hard for people to finesse you into believing bullshit. And this is where we are with demons. This is why spiritual capitalism is such a huge thing. People are able to convince you of nonsense. And a lot of the times they convince you of nonsense because you don't know any better. And you don't know any better because you don't have the research. Again, I had to look for this content. I couldn't find it anywhere. I couldn't find it. I couldn't definitely find a Black woman talking about it. I couldn't find anybody talking about it. Every time you go to look up spirituality on YouTube with women of color, it's the crystals, it's the tarot cards, it's the I can levitate in the middle of the night in my sleep, it's the ninth ethers, it's the I'm from the galaxy and the moon, I worship the Orishas. It's always something else. So I wanted to get into all of that, and I wanted to get into my readings next so that I can just start to introduce to you the research that I've been doing, and also kind of talk more about my seminar, which will be ready along with my female erasure seminar right in time for back to school for August of 2024. So yeah, let's get into it. I'm going to start with my writings first, and then we're going to get into the reading and the research, and it's just going to be fun. And this is fun shit to me. This is not something that I'm telling you to believe. This is just something that I like to do for fun because I love to research and I love to know where a lot of the things that we think about, where does it come from? Where does that person is demonic? Where does that come from? How did we get that into our linguistic speech? How did we get here with that language? So yeah. So this is from my writings. I wrote, I decided to do this seminar to give women a different perspective from what they have been taught about the soul and the spirit and the devil and demons. I can sit for 100 days and speak about religions and the differences of various beliefs around the world. And the cool thing about deconstructing and moving away from all male ideologies is the freedom you get from that mental captivity. One common denominator in all spiritual beliefs around the world is the perpetual war between good and evil, light and dark, up and down, left and right, with human beings always gravitating towards light and the light and fearing the unknown and death. This pattern of behavior is seen in all religious and spiritual beliefs, and it is because of these beliefs that people become preoccupied with darkness and how to spot it, avoid it, and get rid of it once you do come in contact with it, right? So, how did all of this perpetuate? And this is just from my writings, because you guys know that I love writing. How did all of this perpetuate? Who kept the belief of the darkness alive? Um, did he or did he not weaponize this belief because it perpetuated a need for him being savior? Remember, I said before, some people buy cats to get rid of mice. Possessed by male ideology is where many women are. And I want to tell you that the next time you hear someone talking about demons, you will have a deeper understanding of what the satanic panic is and how this time period in history paralyzed people and put women at the center of this belief in demons. The male set her up to be hated in this way. He set her up to be hated in this way, and he did it so that it can be embraced on an eternal level. People no longer take responsibility for their actions, and when something happens that they can't explain, they immediately make demons to be the cause. This behavior is elementary and shows that the person who is spewing these beliefs have no philosophical discernment surrounding the origins of belief in demons and where these concepts come from. And why should they? It's easier to have the demon as a scapegoat. It's easier to blame a non-material entity for the behavior of fundamentally flawed individuals. A woman is always used, and the attraction to her story can bring us to the starting point of the satanic panic and how we got to this place of beliefs in Satan and the demon, who are his homeboys, right? The demons who are his homeboys. We can start by saying what some of the early Gnostics believed. They have always stood by the belief that the God of the Bible, as you know it, the King James Version of the Bible, pick a Bible. They have always stood by the belief that the God of the Bible is actually Satan, and who the Bible claims to be Satan is actually God. We will entertain this concept for the sake of the live in the video and also discuss the history surrounding the Christian concept of evil. And I say Christian because when you do hear people today talking about demons, this comes from people who are either indoctrinated in Christianity or Islam. Christians holding to the belief of demons and Muslims holding to the belief in the jinn. In any case, these beliefs are not grounded in reality, and this is a common pattern in all delusional beliefs. If you can't explain something or why something happened, your best bet is to blame evil. The issue with this is for the one attaching demonic activity to the ill behavior of others, they never internalize that the same demon when they display the same vile behavior to other people. So you can go out and say that people are demonic, but then you yourself, an asshole, are you demonic when you are also mean and nasty to people? They never really get to that. They can just, spiritual people always point the finger at other people and make themselves to be the light or the center of everything that is holy and that is good. It's always other people's fault with people who are spiritual. I'm not spiritual, so you know that everything is my fault. I take full responsibility for everything that ever happened in my life, and I take responsibility for that because there is no other after this place is gone. There is no other, but spiritual people would like for you to believe that, yes, absolutely, there's a place after here. This person didn't do this thing because demons exist, and so on and so forth. This is lukewarm behavior. So just going back to my writings, I wrote the blessed versus the curse, and the preoccupation with being blessed, which is in some odd ways singles you out and makes you special. You are the product of two people having sex. That's the reality. To insist that you were chosen by some God that you can't even prove exists is a fundamentally flawed belief. I'm going to say that again. To insist that you were chosen by some God that you can't even prove exists is a fundamentally flawed belief. The information presented here will only get worse. So if you are a Christian or a Muslim or a witch or a spiritualist, pause the video here and exit the broadcast. I promise you that I don't really care whether or not you stay or whether or not you leave. This is for people who want to have fun and get into this information because it's just good to know. But if you're a spiritualist, this will be triggering to you because I'm not going to entertain any thoughts surrounding spirituality. I won't entertain any thoughts around the Christian concept of God, the Islamic concept of God. We have to tear down all of those male ideologies if we claim we want true freedom from the male. And you can't do that. You can't claim that you want to decenter men, but here you are playing around with tarot cards. Here you are playing around with the Bible and talking about demons all day. These are all male ideologies. The tarot card deck was invented by two white men who were religious, right? So we have to just get into all of this information. And I will make this live a little lengthy, but pay attention to the particular time period called the Satanic Panic and how women, I believe, and the hate of women made this panic solidify in the minds of the American public up until this day. Just keep in mind that I already told you about demons and how these beliefs have an actual origin that we can pinpoint in history. We can pinpoint the exact moment that all of these beliefs kind of came out. We can pinpoint it in regards to demonic activity and in our lifetime, because I can't go back to the 1930s or the 1950s. The information is there, but for the sake of this video, we're going to start at the 1980s. I think a lot of people who are listening were kind of born in the 1980s, maybe a little bit before the 1980s, maybe the 1990s, 2000s, what have you. It's just good information to have. And I will encourage you, don't pay attention to me. Don't listen to me because you're not going to listen to me anyway. Take information down, take down the names, take down the dates, and then go and do your own research. Don't use Google. You can use Google for a quick research, a quick fast search if you want to, but it's better to kind of download an alternative search engine. DuckDuckGo is a good one. There's another one called OceanNet. That's a really good one. Just do the research for yourself so you can't say that bitch in West 4B said wrong information and I'm going to read her to filth in the comment section. You don't have to do all of that. Just take down the information and then leave the live and then go look it up for yourself so that you can have that grounding on your own without me intervening in that. So for the purposes of this live video and for this live discussion, I'm going to first start out with giving you 3 dates to remember. 3 time periods, 3 years that you can kind of jot down just so that you can follow me on this historical knowledge. The first year is 1971. The second year is 1973. And the third year is 1980. Those 3 years, 1971, 1973, and 1980. And I just want to set the scene for you in regards to these time periods. So we have William Blatty. If you don't know who William Blatty is a devout Catholic man. Loves Catholicism, was raised Catholic. His mother is Catholic. His father is Catholic. This is his religion. He sets out to write the book, The Exorcist. Okay? He publishes that book in May 5th, 1971. He publishes the book and it goes haywire. In 1973, William Blatty decides to kind of put his book to film. And in 1973, the movie, The Exorcist, was born. Okay? So in regards to William Blatty being a Catholic and being a devout Catholic, I want to read to you what he said was the purpose of his book and the subsequent film. And I want you to just pay attention to this, because this is a religious man who loves his God, who loves Catholicism, and this is the drive behind his work. This is what he said. And I'm taking this from ncronline.org. So it says, Blatty was convinced that The Exorcist would make people want to become Catholic or renew their lack of faith. As far-fetched as this seemed to me, he was quite sincere about it and claimed to have evidence that confessions went up after people viewed the movie in Catholic Heavy in New York. So Blatty, not only did he consult with Catholic priests who claimed to specialize in exorcisms to make this film, he also had this goal in him to bring people back to the faith. Because at that time period, this is the 1970s. This is, that era where people are, moving away from God. They're getting into New Age. They're not as religious as they were. And Blatty didn't like this at all. He wanted to bring people back to his religion. Now, 1973, The Exorcist is filmed. It's let out in American theaters, and people lose their shit. You can also research all of this. More people, after they saw The Exorcist, like he said, because he's actually right, people started to head back to church in droves. And why? Not because they love God all of a sudden. It's because the movie and the book, The Exorcist, scared the shit out of them, which is what he wanted. You can't have religion and the love of God if you don't have the fear of Satan and the fear of the devil. These things cannot operate without fear. And Blatty knew this. Now, the next year that I'm going to give to you in regards to the satanic panic is 1980. 1980 is when the book Michel Remembers is published. And Michel Remembers is about a woman who suffered a miscarriage. Her name is Michelle Smith. She suffers this miscarriage and she teams up with a doctor from Canada to kind of help her, like, with what she was going on, what she had going on with her mentally. She needed help. She was suffering from depression. She just had this miscarriage and she was looking for relief. She teams up with this psychiatrist, and he's not making any breakthroughs with Michelle. After 600 hours of work, for some magical reason, she decides to lose it in his office, screams for 20 minutes, and then she develops the voice of a 5-year-old child. And in her speaking as this 5-year-old child, she's hinting to the doctor that she has been the victim of satanic ritual abuse. So let me give you some clarity, okay? I just want to go back to the readings, and I don't want you to listen to me because you're not going to listen to me anyway. You're going to say that, she's a piece of shit. Don't listen to me. Leave the live and do the information. Put in all the names that I just mentioned to you in Google so that you can find the information on your own. But I'm going to read it to you anyway for the people who are interested. This is what it says in regards to Michel Remembers and Michelle Smith and Dr. Padzer. That's his name. P-A-Z-D-E-R. That's his name. And he's from Canada. Okay? Michel Remembers is a discredited 1980 book co-written by Canadian psychiatrist Lawrence Padzer and his psychiatric patient and eventual wife, Michelle Smith. A bestseller, Michel Remembers relied on the discredited practice of recovered memory therapy to make sweeping, lurid claims about satanic ritual abuse involving Smith, which contributed to the rise of the satanic panic in the 1980s. While the book presents its claims as fact and was extensively marketed on that basis at the time, no evidence was provided. All investigations into the book failed to corroborate any of its claims, with investigators describing its content as being primarily based on elements of popular culture and fiction that were popular at the time when it was written. If I could bet money on anything, I would bet money on the fact that Michelle Smith saw the movie The Exorcist. She saw the movie The Exorcist. She lost her child with this miscarriage, and she was looking for a way to kind of act out this angst. So, in order for her to act out this angst, she decides to cosplay as a little child and recover these memories of her being harmed by her mother. Okay, she's claimed that she was harmed by her mother. So let's just continue to read. Michelle Remembers chronicles Hazard's therapy during the late 1970s with his longtime patient, Smith. This is the late 1970s. By this time, The Exorcist had already come out. The book had already come out in 1971. The movie had already come out in 1973, and people wouldn't let it die. People would not let that movie die because it had such an impact. People today, to this very day in 2024, cannot sit and watch The Exorcist on its own by themselves. A lot of people can't because they're so scared of that movie. And that was the whole point, to get people to be scared. In 1973, Padzer first started treating Smith at his private psychiatric practice in Victoria, British Columbia. In 1976, when Padzer was treating Smith for depression related to her having a miscarriage, Smith confided she felt that she had something important to tell him, but could not remember what it was. Soon thereafter, Padzer and Smith had a session where Smith purportedly screamed for 25 minutes nonstop and eventually started speaking in the voice of a 5-year-old. According to Padzer, during the next 14 months, he spent more than 600 hours using hypnosis to help Smith recover seeming memories of satanic ritual abuse that occurred when she was 5 years old in 1954 and 1955 at the hands of her mother, Virginia Proby, and others, all of whom Smith said were members of a satanic cult in Victoria. This is just what this woman is saying. She's making these broad claims. She's claiming that her mother did this to her and her mother hurt her and her mother is a part of this secret cult. All of the claims that Michelle Smith made in this book were investigated, and none of them turned out to be true. The book was later discredited, but at that time period, Padzer and Smith had already turned into cool, thousandaires with the publication of this book. They even, from the proceeds of the book, made it all the way to the Vatican in Rome to speak to Catholic priests about their satanic ritual abuse information, because Michelle and Padzer at the time before the book was discredited, they kind of made it seem like this was actually going on. And in actuality, it was all false and it was all made up. There was no truth to it and it was investigated. And I also wanted to read you about the summary of the book as well, because Michelle Remembers, I do have Michelle Remembers, and it's for free in the Discord, but I just wanted to read the summary really quickly for you. The book chronicles therapy sessions between Padzer and Smith and alleged recovered memories of satanic rituals she claimed she was forced to attend. Padzer stated that Smith was abused by the Church of Satan, purportedly a worldwide organization predating the Christian Church. The first alleged ritual attended by Smith occurred in 1954 when she was just 5 years old, with the final one, an 81-day ritual in 1955 that supposedly summoned Satan himself and involved the interventions of Jesus, the Virgin Mary, and Michael the Archangel, who removed the scars received by Smith throughout the year of abuse and blocked memories of the event until the time was right. The book claims that during the rite, Smith was allegedly tortured, locked in cages, sexually assaulted, forced to participate in various rituals, witnessed several human sacrifices, and was rubbed with the blood and body parts of various sacrificed infants and adults. After Smith had seemingly recovered her memories, she and Padzer consulted with various church authorities. Remember, I said that they went to Rome and eventually traveled to the Vatican. Okay, this is how far this woman took this lie. This is how far Padzer and her took this lie. They took it on a road trip, if you will. He eventually divorced his wife and married Smith, and then they ran off into the sunset together, promoting this book. They were on various television shows. I don't know if they've made it to Geraldo, but they were all over the place promoting this book. And what they were promoting was the notion that there was actually in real life a satanic underground ritual cult that existed in the United States. So do you see where I'm going here? Anytime you hear someone coming out with a claim, there's always a motive behind it. Okay. And in regards to Michelle Smith, Padzer, and even Blatty, there was money to be made on the things that they were saying. So Michelle Remembers put out the notion that there is an underground satanic ritual abuse cult that kidnapped children and harmed them, and everyone should be aware of it because people were being abducted and brought into this cult. Okay. And with Blatty, he also had a lot of money to make in regards to his film and the publication of his books. And it worked. What they created was a stir. And it was easy to create this stir because people had no prior knowledge of it. People had no prior knowledge of it, and they were only going off of what meets the eye. So the reason why I believe that the satanic panic happened so rapidly in the 1980s is because these people are coming from a time period of one, we didn't even speak about Rosemary's Baby. We didn't even speak about that film. So we have Rosemary's Baby, which I'm sure you know of. You have The Exorcist, you have the book The Exorcist, and now you have Michelle Remembers. Let's introduce the satanic panic of the 1980s. So when you hear women all over the internet today talking about demons and talking about how you have to be careful of that person because there's demons walking around, you then know that everything that they're saying is bullshit. There are no demons. And the fact that people think that they are demons actually walking around today is because of this time period in the 1980s that fucking stuck with us. It stuck with us and it never let up. And it never let up because so many people would not let it go. Because now I feel that men had another angle to now usher in fear. They needed to have fear. You have to have fear to perpetuate or to require that people obey. So let's go back to Michelle Remembers and the impact that it had in the 1980s, because this was huge, right? This was really huge and it never ended. And along with the satanic rituals that Michelle Smith claimed that she was a part of, she also spoke about demons and being abducted by demons and how demons were walking among us and we wouldn't know what they look like because they present themselves in human form. And you never know. All of these things is something that a sad woman made in her head. She was suffering from a miscarriage. And her depression took her to another place. But let's continue to read. Michelle Remembers was first published with articles in People magazine and the National Enquirer. During the 1980s, Padzer and Smith toured the United States to promote the book. Ultimately, a publishing success, the book earned Padzer and Smith a $100,000 hardcover advance, $240,000 for paperback rights, royalties, and a potential movie deal. In 1989, almost 10 years after the publication of Michelle Remembers, Oprah Winfrey featured Smith as a guest on her show alongside Laurel Rose Wilson, author of the equally fictitious satanic ritual abuse survival memoir, Satan's Underground, which was published using the pseudonym Lauren Stratford. Both women's experiences were presented by Winfrey as incontrovertible fact, and not once did she question the authenticity of any claim in either book. So even Oprah Winfrey got on this bandwagon of believing these two women who came up with these stories. And the reason why Satan's Underground was also so successful is because it's riding on the coattail of Michelle Remembers. Now everyone was able to write a book about satanic ritual abuse and demons, and everyone did so, one after the fucking other, and they made millions of dollars from it. Millions of dollars from these stories. So remember the time periods that I gave you. 1971, the book The Exorcist in May 5th of that year is published by William Blatty. In 1973, William Blatty then consults with the Catholic Church and ministers or priests who specialize in exorcisms. He consults with them to help with the production of the movie, The Exorcist, right? And he did this on the guise of, I want people to get back to the Catholic Church. He said it himself. Then in 1980, Michelle Smith and Padzer, they get together and they come up with this, recovered memory therapy of satanic ritual abuse. And then it skyrockets. And one person and another person and another person, it spread like wildfire in the 1980s. If you were so happened to be talking about one, multiple personality disorders or satanic panic or anything that had to do with demons in the 1980s, that would guarantee you a seat on television. And this is how it took off. It didn't take off because someone actually researched something and saw that, there was actually a demon in the midst. No, they never saw that. And even with the instances that we do have of actual what people would believe is an exorcism, we know historically that the first so-called exorcism was performed on a girl who had suffered from seizures. She suffered from grand mal seizures. And these priests didn't know what a grand mal seizure was. So they therefore then said that she was possessed by a devil or a demon. And it was not true. It wasn't true. It wasn't true at all. And I know that you're not going to believe anything I say. So please get a pen and paper down. I'm going to give you a few names so that you can put into Google and look it up on your own. The first name is Anneliese Michel. And the second movie that you can kind of look up to prove that what I'm saying is true is the movie called The Exorcism of Emily Rose, which is the story of this real life person, Anneliese. And I'm just going to read about her to you so that you can understand where this belief of in possessions, where it comes from. Okay. So Anna Elizabeth Anneliese Michel, born 21st of September 1952 and died on the 1st of July in 1976, was a German woman who underwent 67 Catholic exorcism rites during the year before her death. She died of malnutrition for which her parents and priests were convicted of negligent homicide. I'm going to read that again. She died of malnutrition for which her parents and priests were convicted of negligent homicide. She was diagnosed with epileptic psychosis, temporal lobe epilepsy, and had a history of psychiatric treatment that proved ineffective. When Anneliese was 16, she experienced a seizure and was diagnosed with psychosis caused by temporal lobe epilepsy. Shortly thereafter, she was diagnosed with depression and was treated by a psychiatric hospital. By the time that she was 20, she had become intolerant of various religious objects and began to hear voices. Her condition worsened despite medication, and she became suicidal, also displaying other symptoms for which she took medications as well. After taking psychiatric medications for 5 years, and that failing to improve her symptoms, Anneliese and her family became convinced that she was possessed by a demon. As a result, her family appealed to the Catholic Church for an exorcism. While rejected at first, 2 priests got permissions from the local bishop in 1975. The priests began performing exorcism and the family stopped consulting doctors. Anneliese stopped eating food and died of malnourishment and dehydration after 67 exorcism sessions. Anneliese's parents and the two Roman Catholic priests were found guilty of negligent homicide and were sentenced to 6 months in jail, reduced to 3 years of probation, as well as a fine. In conference several years later, German bishops retracted the claim that she was actually possessed. She wasn't possessed. She wasn't possessed. There was no demon. There was nothing. The girl was sick. And instead of them dealing with her sickness, they labeled her being possessed by a demon and starved her essentially, practiced all of these exorcisms on her, and she died as a result. And what's also awful about this is that these Catholic priests, they know for sure that demons do not exist. They know for sure of it. And we can go back all day and talk about the Roman Catholic Church and the Council of Nicaea and all of these things that kind of proves that none of these men believe in anything that they're teaching, but it does make them really, really wealthy. And that's the whole goal here. The whole goal for them is to kind of stay rich, and they can only stay rich if they have people believing in nonsense, which a lot of people do. And demons is one of them. So someone will say, oh, so what is a demon? What is a demon? So let's define what a demon is, because we are talking about the satanic panic here. And a demon is a malevolent supernatural entity. Historically, belief in demons or stories about demons occurs in folklore, mythology, religion, and literature. These beliefs are reflected in media, including comics, fiction, film, television, and video games. Belief in demons probably goes back to the Old Stone Age period, stemming from humanity's fear of the unknown, the strange, and the horrific. So that's basically what it is. So when you look at all of this information and we get all of this information, we get to kind of pile on the knowledge that we're getting in regards to the satanic panic and this belief in demons and this preoccupation with evil that so many people are obsessed with, right? So this preoccupation comes from, in my personal opinion, people's attempts to not take responsibility for their own actions or for their own behaviors. So it's never the individual who did it. It's always a demon that was in them that caused them to do it, therefore making them demonic, therefore making you better than them. Because once you dismiss a person as being demonic, you set yourself up as the light. You set yourself up as the individual who can recognize and see that people are demonic, and you therefore have the ability to chastise or label a person as that. But the whole time that you're doing that, demons don't even exist. A trash individual is a trash individual on their own. To kind of blame it on this entity that you have no proof of is elementary. It's fundamentally flawed. And I think that we need to have these discussions, because I told you before that I'm doing this seminar on the soul and the spirit and spiritual capitalism, and how I feel spirituality traps women into this delusional mindset of being preoccupied with shit they can't see, but they claim that they can feel. And the reason why this is always so conflicting for me is that you would see people who would talk shit about the Bible and Jesus and Mary and Joseph all day. And then in the next breath, they're pointing their finger at someone and saying that, they're demonic. Where do you think the idea of demons, where do you think that comes from? It comes from the same Bible that you claim is a piece of shit book. So you can't have both. You understand what I'm saying? And I see that all the time. I see people who are claiming that they are atheists, but will turn around and say that they are two-spirited people. How can you possess two spirits and also be an atheist? If there's no spirit of God, how can you then possess a spirit as a human being? You have to pick a side. And I think this is why I'm doing this spirituality seminar and this spirituality, this information that I love giving out. Because I think, again, from my research, the male invented the spirit. He invented the soul, and he invented all of those things to distract all of us from the reality that we have to live in the world today. And it makes sense that he would do that because he does not contribute to life the way women do. But that's a whole other story. Let's get back to the satanic panic, and let's get back to Michelle Remembers. And I want everyone to kind of pay attention to this and kind of think about the information that you got thus far and how we got here, because I think we need to have this backstory so that we can kind of build on what we're talking about, so that you can just have the knowledge. You don't have to listen to what I say, but it's good to kind of have the knowledge so where you can say, okay, I'm going to research this because I'm not sure. And it's good to do your own research. So the next time you hear someone out there and they're talking to you about demons, and they're talking to you about Satan, and they're talking to you about all of this shit that they have no proof of, you can then say, well, in actuality, this is where that thought process comes from. It comes from a period in the 1980s called the Satanic Panic. And I think it's good to kind of just have that information, because when you lack information and you lack knowledge, it's easier for you to get finessed. And that's what happens to a lot of women. They suffer because of lack of knowledge, right? That's just what I think. So that's just what I think. And I wanted to get back to what satanic ritual abuse is, because I think a lot of people, they've never heard of satanic ritual abuse, but this is basically what the spiritual community that you may or may not be familiar with, when you do hear them talking about things like possessions or demonic spirits or demonic entities or negative vibes or bad energy or woo woo, whatever you want to call it. Satanic ritual abuse is just another caveat of that. And it comes from this time period where people were just running with stories a lot of the time so that they can get rich. So if you wanted to get famous at that time period in the 1980s, this was the best place, this was the best time, and this was the best way to do it, right? No one would really pay attention to what you had to say if you were not therefore talking about demons, how you overpowered demons, how you met Satan, how you consulted with the Archangel Michael, who is now your savior. People had to talk like this so that they can get a coin. At that time, that was a way to get a bag. And it was very lucrative, because after Michelle Remembers came out, then the floodgates opened up. And everyone was now talking about satanic ritual abuse. They were talking about demons. They were talking about dark forces. They were talking about things that go bump in the night, levitating, astral projection, name it. And people were talking about it because it made them wealthy. They were talking about consulting demons and speaking to Satan with tarot cards, and it just became a lot. So let's get to satanic ritual abuse and what it is. And again, this information is for you. So when you do hear someone out there and they're talking to you all day about demons and negative spirits and how powerful they are and how they can levitate in their sleep and they have these powers that are unseen, just know this language is not the first that you've ever heard it. It comes from the 1980s. 20, 30, 40 years ago, people were levitating out of their bodies in their sleep, similar to what they're doing today, and making money off of those stories. And they make money off of those stories because people are not educated enough to see that these things happened before. This is why history, to me, is so very important, because when you do have a very good historical grounding, it's very hard for people to get one over on you, especially in that spiritualist, holy ninth ether goddess community. When you kind of see them coming, you kind of know that it's full of shit. A lot of it is full of shit. And it's full of shit because when you look at the lives, or you look at all of our lives as women, and you listen to these people who have these magical powers, you would think that they would do something to help the communities in which they reside. A lot of them do not, because they can't. And that's basically it. A lot of them do nothing because they cannot. So instead of them saying that they can't do anything, they would have you in some instances paying out your ass so that they can give you a reading, so that they can tell you what's going to happen next. And for some reason, bad shit still happens to those people who employ these individuals who have insight and can see, right? So this is what it says in regard to the satanic panic of the 1980s. It says the satanic panic is a moral panic. A moral panic is defined as a widespread feeling of fear that some evil person or thing threatens the values, interests, or well-being of a community or society. It is the process of arousing social concern over an issue, usually perpetuated by moral entrepreneurs and mass media coverage, and exacerbated by politicians and lawmakers. Moral panic can give rise to new laws aimed at controlling the community. So this is all a play on people's emotions. It's all a play on people's fears. It's all a play on the unknown. But here we have the information because this is not the first moral panic. This is just one that happened within my lifetime and in a lot of the listeners' lifetime. But in our lifetime, if you were born in the 1980s, the 1990s, the 2000s, in these times that we're living in, this is the moral panic that kind of gave usher into a lot of the shit that people believe in today. People are still in 2024, still running around and talking about demonic entities and demons. No proof of it other than the poor behavior of actual human beings, which they never call attention to. They just kind of, brush everything off to a demon being present and not just trash people who are fundamentally flawed. Right? So going back to it, it says a satanic panic is a moral panic consisting of over 12,000 unsubstantiated cases of satanic ritual abuse, sometimes known as ritual abuse, ritualistic abuse, organized abuse, or sadistic ritual abuse, starting in the United States in the 1980s, spreading throughout many parts of the world by the late 1990s, and persisting today. You can go to different parts of the African continent, like West Africa, different countries in West Africa, and people are still running around talking about demons and Satan. Yeah, they do, right? And it says the panic originated in 1980 with the publication of Michel Remembers, a book co-written by Canadian psychiatrist Lawrence Padzer and his patient and future wife, Michelle Smith, which used the controversial and now discredited practice of recovered memory therapy to make claims about satanic ritual abuse involving Smith. I'm going to read that again. To make claims about satanic ritual abuse involving Smith. The allegations, which arose throughout much of the United States, involved reports of physical and sexual abuse of people in the context of occult or satanic rituals. Some allegations involve a conspiracy of a global satanic cult that includes the wealthy and elite, in which children are abducted or bred for human sacrifice, pornography, and prostitution. Nearly every aspect of the ritual abuse is controversial, including its definition, the source of the allegations and proof thereof, testimonies of alleged victims, and court cases involving the allegations and criminal investigations. Right? It says the panic affected lawyers, therapists, and social workers who handle allegations of child sexual abuse. Allegations initially brought together wildly dissimilar groups, including religious fundamentalists, police investigators, child advocates, therapists, and clients in psychotherapy. The term satanic abuse was more common early on, later became satanic ritual abuse, and further secularized into simply ritual abuse. Over time, the accusations became more closely associated with dissociative identity disorder, then called multiple personality disorder, and anti-government conspiracy theories. So I don't know if you remember talk shows of the mid 80s to early 90s to mid 90s. I'm not sure, but back then they used to have Rolanda. I remember she had a talk show. I also remember there was a lady named Jenny Jones. I'm not sure if you remember Jenny Jones. There was, of course, Oprah Winfrey. We had Phil Donahue. We also had Geraldo. We had Montel Williams. Even Queen Latifah had a radio or show, television show program. We also had Ricky Lake. We had Jerry Springer. We had all of these talk shows on the television at the time. And I remember vividly as a young person, at that time period, that every single talk show had an individual on it who had multiple personality disorder. And while they were being interviewed by whoever, Jenny Jones, Geraldo, Donahue, they would, warp into these other people who they claimed lived inside of them. So Michelle remembers what lived inside of her was this 5-year-old child who was able to kind of remember what happened to her when she was a child at the hands of her mother. This is all what Michelle remembers is about. So how did we all get here? How did the dialogue now surrounding human beings fall into this evil versus good, demonic versus angel? How did we get to this place where that is our preoccupation? We no longer deal with what we can see in front of us, but we are preoccupied with what is unseen. How did human beings get to this place of not dealing with reality? I have my own convictions and I have my own conclusions and my own thoughts surrounding that, but it's good to kind of hear what other people think. And from my research, I've found that a lot of people fear death. A lot of people fear the unknown. A lot of people fear tomorrow. And this belief of demons, or this belief in demons, and this belief in God and good, and that action being able to protect you from evil, is what people have put on themselves as like a warm security blanket, if that makes sense, which is fine. But we have to get to the origins of how demons and all of these beliefs perpetuated in our society and in pop culture and in the media and in our conversation and in our dialogue. When something bad happens to another person, the first thing that the majority of Black people say is, oh, the world is crazy. There's a lot of demons walking around. Satan is at work. The devil is alive. How did we get to this place where we're constantly putting things that we have not seen into our dialogue as if they are real? I also wanted to kind of talk about egregores and groupthink and how powerful an egregore is and how powerful groupthink is, because after a while, with people all saying the same thing over and over again, this mantra of the devil existing and this mantra of demons existing and this mantra of all of these is existing, do these things manifest in actual reality? I don't think so, but some people do. And this is why we do have egregores. This is why we do have that theory of people will actually make things happen with their mind and them all being on the same page. And this is why programming people has become such a lucrative business, because if you program people to believe in something, they will actually give that thing that you program to believe life. And it all starts with language. I always say this, but it all starts with language. It starts with verbiage. It starts with the constant programming of you saying that something exists, even though it does not exist. This is why I always talk about linguistic tricks and the sleight of hand and the abracadabra of words, and how men have programmed women to participate in their own erasure with words and with their own beliefs and religion as well. Men have finessed women into believing the God that he created with the same linguistic tricks that we are dealing with today. There's no difference. The programming is the same. But now it's good to kind of be able to kind of show women what I'm talking about. So here's the origins of it, right? So how did we get to demons? How did we get to the satanic panic? And I want you all to do this research. But remember, I said before, in the 1970s, you had, I think, 3 or 4 major movies that made a lot of people lose their shit. And this is also the height and the time where serial unalivers were also at their height, and they used this satanic panic to their advantage. So instead of saying that, oh, I'm just a piece of shit that likes to hurt people, it turned into, I'm psychotic and the devil made me do it. It's a perfect scapegoat because 1, you can't see it, and 2, everyone who doesn't know better believes that it's real. So here's the origins. It says among the explanations of why the panic occurred when it did, or took the shape that it did, include 3 films. Okay? And we spoke about one of those films. No, we spoke about 2. We spoke about The Exorcist, and I mentioned Rosemary's Baby also. So here's the 3 films that I also wanted to let you know about. So the 3 films that opened and ran near the beginning of the panic having to do with Satanism, namely Rosemary's Baby, 1968, The Exorcist, 1973, and The Omen in 1976. According to scholar Joseph Laycock, patients hypnotized by therapists to recover memories of SRA, satanic ritual abuse, often seem to recalling scenes from these films. So people went out and watched these movies and then internalized what they saw on the big screen and then verbalized that and put that out of themselves and made everyone believe that it's real. It's all movies. It's all made up. It's all fake. So it makes perfect sense that Michelle Smith would come up with this cockamamie story of being kidnapped as a 5-year-old and tortured underground in 1980. Because look at the movies that she was already exposed to. Look at the imagery that she was already exposed to. She, I'm sure, saw The Exorcist. I'm sure she saw The Omen. And I'm most positive that she saw Rosemary's Baby, because Mia Farrow at the time was all over the place. But let's continue. The reaction against the surge of new religious movements, NRMs, in the 1960s due to both the immigration reform allowing mercenaries for Asian religions, as well as new religions, including the Church of Satan, arising from the counterculture of the baby boomer generation, sometimes called the cult wars or cult scare. The Tate LaBianca murders committed by Charles Manson and his cult of mostly lonely teenagers from broken homes. That's another instance that kind of played into the origins of the satanic panic. And lastly, Mike Warnick's best-selling 1972 memoir, The Satan Seller, in which he claimed to have led a group of 1,500 Satanists that engage in great and human sacrifice before he converted to evangelical Christianity. The book was praised by Moody Monthly and the Christian Century. 2 decades later, the book was debunked by evangelical magazine Cornerstone. It says 2 days later, the book was debunked by an evangelical magazine named The Cornerstone. So all of these things are made up. And I just want for women to kind of see what happens when you have idle people who have a lot of fucking time and dangerously a lot of fucking money. Because when individuals have a lot of money, they're able to produce and put out of themselves their own personal beliefs and have you digest it. William Blatty was a Catholic. He was a Catholic and he wanted for other people to be Catholics. And the best way that he did that was write this book called The Exorcist to scare the crap out of people. And it did. I know people right now, grown people, who still will not watch that movie in its entirety because it scares the heebie-jeebies out of them. So this is where we are in regards to the origins of these things. And sadly enough, I wanted to end this live with talking about the McMartin preschool trial. And that trial, I'm going to read it in its entirety because to me, what they did to those women because of this satanic panic bullshit is something that should be studied in history in the future. I think it has been because it's noted that the McMartin preschool trials was or is still, it could be different today, one of the most expensive or the most expensive trial in American history. They had these women in courts for about, I want to say 10 years, questioning them on demons and Satan and shit that you hear people talking about today. And I'm going to read you it in its entirety because it's so fascinating how people can just hop on the bandwagon of let's just all be delusional as fuck together. And with men spearheading it, it's even more detriment to the woman. And these are women who were very successful. Okay, so we're going to get into that as well. And we're going to talk about it in a few. So let me just pull up the article 1 minute. So this article is from the Californian newspaper and it's dated April 1st, 1985. And it says McMartin preschool parents fear satanic practices. And it's a little grainy, so bear with me. It says Manhattan Beach, AP, parents of children who were allegedly molested and shown animal sacrifices at a preschool now say they believe the only explanation for the bizarre accounts is a devil worship cult. I believe it's a big cult and it's a lot bigger than we think, said the mother of John Doe number 9, who testified about alleged devil worship at the preliminary hearing for 7 staff members of the McMartin preschool. Oh, absolutely, beyond any doubt, I know it. In an interview with the Daily Breeze, she said her son, now 10 years old, told him the devil was trying to control his life. Mom, I feel like he's there in a big jar and I have to keep putting the lid on tighter and tighter to keep them from getting out, the mother quoted her son saying. Other children have told authorities outside court they saw children killed, and a 5-year-old claimed seeing a baby beheaded. The Tolerance newspaper said no bodies had been found and no murder charges had been filed in the case. Defense attorneys for the 7 teachers charged with 207 counts of molestation and a combined count of conspiracy call the devil worship theories a desperate attempt by the prosecution to invent a motive in the case. It's like a snowball rolling down a hill. It starts out with one kid saying somebody slapped the bunny, said defense attorney Boris Latner. By the time the snowball's at the bottom of the hill, it's a baby with its head cut off. And in between, it's a top this competition among kids. All 7 of the defendants have pleaded innocence. And I'm sorry, I'm going to read that again. All of the 7 defendants have pleaded innocence of all the alleged abuse of 41 students between 1978 and 1974. Mind you, this article is from 1975. This trial was by far the longest in California history. I think this trial went on for about 10 years and it cost taxpayers $15 million. 15 million. So let me just finish reading this article. It says, I'm not in a position to say it's a satanic cult, said Key McFarlane, a social worker at Children's Institute International, where hundreds of preschoolers were initially interviewed. But she added, if 3 children describes this, we could say 3 kids had delusions. But when you have hundreds of kids and then the article, it looks like it just cuts off and then there's no more, there's no other article, there's no other art to read about it. And this is from April 1st, 1985. April 1st, 1985. So we're going to get back into the readings in regards to how this McMartin case started out. And if you hear about how it started, you're going to think to yourself, there's no way that this one individual, this one man, this one individual can start something that turned out to be all bullshit in the end, right? But we're gonna get into it. So I had my little theory in regards to the McMartin preschool trial, and I did my own research in regards to the location of the preschool because I was really interested in the location of the actual preschool. I was really obsessed with where the preschool was and why did this happen to these group of women who just opened an innocent daycare center, right? So if you go to Google or any search engine, DuckDuckGo, whatever you use, and you look up the address 931 Manhattan Beach Boulevard, Manhattan Beach, California, 90266. This is the location of the McMartin preschool, which is fine. But then if you pan out on the maps, you can see how close this preschool is to Manhattan Beach. And just further up, if you pan out even more, you see the famous Bruce's Beach. So this is a very hot location at the time. And I think the success of this preschool got the attention of a lot of people who saw it as a good business. This is what I'm thinking that happened. Because if you think about it, the McMartin preschool at the time was the only preschool on the block. It was the only preschool on the block, and these women were running this preschool and they got a lot of business. Imagine you're in a residential neighborhood, you're minutes from the beach, you have access to that location area, you're smack dab in the middle of small families who have to go to work and they need a place to stick their kids. These ladies were making an incredible amount of money at the time that this preschool was open. And I think that is the reason why it got so much attention. And I think once they did kind of get more clientele, more children, more people interested in their daycare, they raised the prices a little bit. Maybe some people could or could not afford it. And then they came up with this story of this whole thing with satanic ritual abuse. But that's just my theory because of the location. The location, if you go to any map right now and you pan out, you're going to see Manhattan Beach like almost 2-3 blocks away from them. And I'm thinking that maybe that's the reason. So let's read about it. And this is what it says on famoustrials.com. And I love famoustrials.com because you can kind of put in anything and just read about different cases throughout history, right? And it says the McMartin preschool abuse trial, the longest and most expensive criminal trial in American history, should serve as a cautionary tale. When it was all over, the government had spent 7 years. I heard it was 10 years, but nonetheless, I've heard that it was 7 to 10 years and $15 million investigating and prosecuting a case that led to no convictions. So this is why the devil made me do it cannot stand up in court. The reason why it can't stand up in court is because there's no evidence of it. And you're going to see this with the McMartin preschool trial. So just keep this in mind anytime you hear people speaking about demons, demonic activity, they have privy knowledge to things that are unseen. You got to kind of look at them as fucking quacks, because at the end of the day, things that we can't see cannot have weight on the behavior of people who we can see, right? I remember when I was in the Bronx a little while ago, there's a girl in the Bronx right now, and she's a cool girl, but her business, you know what she sells for a living up in the Bronx? She sells something called spiritual baths. Like, it's spiritual baths. It's a bunch of herbs that she, I guess, put together, and then she gives them to you or whoever wants to buy them, and then you go home and you take a bath in these spiritual herbs. And according to her, it can help bring you, because she has different varieties, right? She has like a spiritual bath for love, and then she has a spiritual bath for money, and she has a spiritual bath for like a breakthrough in your life. Like if you're stagnant, I saw that on the labeling. Like if you have a stagnant life and you need a breakthrough, right? She has a spiritual bath for all of these things. And she's a wonderful girl, but when I was digging at her, I kind of said, why would you need a spiritual bath for shit that we're going through in the physical? And her explanation is that the spiritual supersedes the physical. And I'm thinking to her, like, wait, how can the spiritual supersede the physical when you and I can't see the spiritual? We can only see the physical, and we're acting right now in the physical. How can you entertain something that you have not seen and expect for a physical bath to take care of spiritual problems? How do you wash the fucking spirit was the question that I wanted to ask her, right? And we stay there for maybe, it was a fucking July 4th thing. It wasn't even July 4th, it was like the day after. But the whole thing is, how do you bathe the spirit? And then we got into this, it turned into one of those woo conversations, because then I have to dig at her, and I have to kind of say, well, no, if you're going to make me think, that I'm going to make you think fucking harder. So tell me where the spirit is and where I can find it, right? And it turned into this huge debate with a lot of people agreeing with me at the end in questioning her. And it was all fun. It wasn't like we were battling or having a crazy debate, but these are the questions that you should ask the woo people, right? Because a lot of the time you're going to get the same answer. It's bullshit. So let's get back to the article. And it says, should serve as a cautionary tale. When it was all over, the government had spent 7 years and $15 million investigating and prosecuting a case that led to no convictions. More seriously, the McMartin case left in its wake hundreds of emotionally damaged children, as well as ruined careers for members of the McMartin staff. And this is also a side note as well. The children who are now adults today, all of them kind of came out and said that, as children, they were coerced to say the things that they said to the child protective service workers and the social workers. All of them kind of coerced the children to say things about the McMartin preschool teachers. None of it was true. And you can also look that up as well. It also says here that no one paid a bigger price than Ray Buckley, one of the principal defendants in the case, who spent 5 years in jail awaiting trial for a crime most people recognize today he never committed. McMartin Jr., Brenda Williams, I'm sorry, I read that wrong. McMartin juror Brenda Williams said that the trial experience taught her to be more cautious. I now realize how easily something can be said and misinterpreted and blown out of proportion. Another juror, Mark Bassett, singled out experts for blame. I thought some of the expert testimony about the children told you more about the expert than the child. I mean, if the expert says children are always 100% believable, and then you have a child who is not believable, either the expert is extremely biased or they've never seen anything like that child before. The McMartin trial had its origins in a call placed to police in Manhattan Beach, California by Judy Johnson, the mother of a 2.5-year-old son who attended the McMartin preschool on about 10 occasions in 1983. Johnson told Detective Jay Hogg that a school aide, Ray Bucky, the 25-year-old son of the owner of the preschool, had molested her son. Despite the fact that the young boy was unable to identify Ray from photos, the police conducted searches of Bucky's home, confiscated such evidence as a rubber duck, a graduation robe, a teddy bear, and Playboy magazines. Detective Hall arrested Bucky on September 7th 1983. The next day, Police Chief Harry Colmeyer sent a letter to 200 McMartin preschool parents informing them that Ray Bucky was suspected, of child abuse and asking them for information. The letter asked parents to question your child to see if he or she has been a witness to any crime or if he or she has been a victim. The letter listed the possible criminal acts under investigation. The acts include a few things that I can't kind of say on YouTube. I'll just link the article below and you can go back and read it for yourself. But moving on, it says Chief Colmeyer's letter ended by asking parents to please keep this investigation strictly confidential because of the nature of the charges and the highly emotional effect it could have on our community. Please do not discuss this investigation with anyone outside your immediate family. Needless to say, it wasn't long before everyone was connected with the McMartin preschool. I read that wrong. Connected with the McMartin preschool, and indeed, most everyone in the Los Angeles metropolitan area knew of the ongoing investigation of Ray Bucky. Judy Johnson's reports of misbehavior at the McMartin preschool became increasingly bizarre. She claimed that Peggy Bucky, Ray's mother, was involved in satanic practices. She said she was said to have taken Johnson's son to church where the boy was made to watch a baby being beheaded and then was forced to drink the blood. She insisted that Ray Bucky had sodomized her son while his head was in the toilet and had taken him to a car wash and locked him in the trunk. Johnson told police that Ray pranced around the preschool in a cape and a Santa Claus costume, and that other teachers at the school chopped up rabbits and placed some sort of star on her son's bottom. Eventually, most prosecutors would come to recognize Johnson's allegations as as the delusions of a paranoid schizophrenic. But the snowball of suspicion had been started rolling. Yeah. Chief Colmeyer's letter led to new accusation and demands from parents for a full-scale investigation of doings at the McMartin preschool. Bowing to this pressure, the district attorney office handed a major portion of the continuing investigation over to Key McFarland, a consultant for the Children's Institute International, CII, an agency with the mission of identifying and treating abused children. Parents were encouraged to send their children to CII for 2-hour interviews. McFarland pressed about 400 children through a series of leading questions and the offer of rewards. Can I read that again? McFarland pressed 400 children through a series of leading questions. We all know what leading questions are, and the offer of rewards to report instances of abuse at McMartin. The interviews often followed a pattern. At first, children generally denied seeing any evidence of abuse. And that's the true, even with them, as adults coming up today and kind of saying, we didn't see anything happen. But we were told to say that we saw something happen. All of the children were coerced by everyone involved, the adults involved who believed in this satanic, demonic bullshit. But going back, it says, at first, children generally denied seeing any evidence of abuse. Eventually, however, many children came around to giving McFarland the stories that she clearly wanted to hear. After the interviews, McFarland told parents that their children had been abused and described the nature of the alleged abuse. By March 1984, 384 former McMartin students had been diagnosed as sexually abused. Can you imagine? 384 children. Let's put this into perspective as to why this is so ridiculous. The staff at the McMartin preschool, I want to say, wasn't even a dozen people. A dozen people. So for the less than a dozen people, this claim of those people, or, Mr. Bucky, abusing 384 children. This was the claim. And when you research these children today and where are they, some of them, many of them have came forward and said, nothing happened to us. Not one thing happened. We never saw a demon. We never saw any blood. We never saw Satan. We were just told to kind of go along with it. So by March 1984, 384 former McMartin students had been diagnosed as sexually abused. In addition to interviews, 150 children received medical examinations. Dr. Astrid Heger of CII concluded that 80% of the children she examined had been molested. For the most part, she based her findings not on physical evidence as you might expect, but on medical histories and her belief that any conclusion should validate the child's story. Her initial set of examinations revealed physical evidence of sexual assault in only 6 cases, and those assaults could have happened at home or anywhere. Using a magnifying device called a colposcope, Dr. Heger claimed to detect small scarring patterns in genital and rectal areas of children, which she suggested sexual abuse. Other researchers, however, would later insist that the scarring patterns CII's doctors discovered were common even in children with no history of sexual abuse. And when a nationally recognized child abuse expert conducted blind studies using Dr. Heger's slides, the result was no correlation between the evaluation of medical experts. This is something that they all made up. On March 22nd, 1984, a grand jury indicted Ray Bucky, Peggy Bucky Ray's mother, Peggy Ann Bucky Ray's sister, Virginia McMartin, founder of the preschool 30 years earlier, and 3 other McMartin teachers, Marianne Jackson, Bet Radar, and Babette Spilter. The grand jury initially indicted the McMartin 7 on 115 counts of child sexual abuse. McMartin 7 is what they called them at the time. 2 months later, an additional 93 indictment counts were added as District Attorney Robert Bilabosnian pursued his strategy of hyping the McMartin case to boost his chances in an upcoming primary election. In June, bail for Peggy Bucky was set at $1 million. Ray Bucky was held without bail. By the time the preliminary hearing began in August 1984, prosecutor Leigh Rubin was telling the media that 7 defendants had committed 397 sexual crimes, far more than the number for which they were indicted, and that 30 additional individuals associated with the McMartin preschool were under investigation. Searches of the McMartin preschool and the homes of the defendants failed to produce much incriminating evidence. No nude photographs of children were discovered, despite the insistence of investigators and parents that such photographing was commonplace at McMartin. No evidence was found of the secret rooms where massive instances of sexual abuse were said to have taken place. In March 1985, a group of nearly 50 McMartin parents determined to unearth the fabled secret tunnels began digging at a lot next to the school. A few days later, the parents were joined in their efforts by an archaeological firm hired by the district attorney's office. Still, no secret rooms were ever discovered. The longest and probably strangest preliminary hearing in history began before Municipal Court Judge Aviva Bob in early 1984. The chaotic proceeding featured 7 defendants, each with his or her own attorney, and 3 prosecutors. Unlike the typical preliminary hearing in which the prosecution tries to demonstrate cause for bringing the defendants to trial, and the defense passively observed, the defense in the McMartin hearing mounted an affirmative defense, aggressively cross-examining a parade of prosecution witnesses, including allegedly abused children, McMartin parents, therapists, and medical experts. The defense repeatedly tried to raise questions as to how abuse on such a massive scale could have gone undetected for years, and suggested that much of the testimony of the prosecution's child witnesses was flatly unbelievable. McFarland testified at the preliminary hearing that the abuse was able to go on for years because children either suffered from denial syndrome or were afraid that revealing McMartin's dark secrets would result in their own deaths or the deaths of family members. McFarland explained that she succeeded in bringing out the secrets with the help of anatomically correct dolls and a set of puppets, through which she asked children questions during her interviews. The puppets included Mr. Alligator, Mr. Snake, Detective Dog, and Mr. Sparky. Videotapes of the interviews also showed that McFarland and other therapists relied heavily on leading questions and subtle pressures to persuade children to join the chorus of accusers. The defense played tapes that showed therapist Sean Connerly telling a child interviewee that 183 kids had already revealed yucky secrets, and that all the McMartin teachers were sick in the head and deserved to be beaten up. The testimony of children at the preliminary hearing was shockingly bizarre and often riddled with inconsistencies and contradictions. Several children reported being photographed while performing nude somersaults as part of the naked movie star game. One child said that as the game was being played, the children sang, "What you see is what you are. You're naked, you're a movie star." Others testified as to playing a nude version of cowboys and Indians, sometimes with the Indians sexually assaulting the cowboys, and sometimes vice versa. Children testified that sexual assaults took place on farms, in circus houses, in homes of strangers, in car washes, in storerooms, and in a secret room at McMartin accessible by a tunnel. One boy told of watching animal sacrifices performed by McMartin teachers wearing robes and masks in a candlelit ceremony at the St. Cross Episcopal Church. In response to a defense question, the boy added that the kids were forced to drink blood of these sacrificed animals. Perhaps the strangest of all was the testimony of one boy who said that the McMartin teachers took students to a cemetery where the kids were forced to use pickaxes and shovels to dig up coffins. Once the coffins were removed from the ground, according to the child, they would be open and the McMartin teachers would begin hacking the body with knives. These are the testimonies of children. By September 1985, and well over a year into the preliminary hearing, some members of the prosecution's own team began to express doubts about the case. One prosecutor was quoted as saying, McFarland could make a 6-month-old baby say he was molested. The two co-prosecutors in the case urged dropping all charges against 5 of the 7 defendants and pushing ahead with prosecution only for Ray Bucky and Peggy Bucky. Chief Prosecutor Leah Rubin, however, argued that all 7 deserved prosecution. After a December 1985 meeting involving over a dozen members of the district attorney's office, the decision was made to drop charges against all defendants except Ray and Peggy Bucky. So far, the case had cost Los Angeles County $4 million, and the trial had yet to begin. Their first trial, a legal bombshell exploded before the trial was scheduled to begin in the courtroom of Judge William R. Pounders. Independent filmmakers producing a documentary on the McMartin trial turned over to both the California AG's office and to the defense attorneys copies of a taped interview with McMartin prosecutor Glenn Stevens. In the interview, Stevens acknowledges that children began embellishing their stories of sexual abuse and said that as prosecutors, we had no business being in court. Stevens also admitted on tape that prosecutors withheld potentially exculpatory information from defense attorneys, including evidence concerning the mental instability of the original complainant in the case, Judy Johnson, as well as evidence that Johnson's son was unable to identify Ray Bucky in a police lineup. Based on the revelations contained in the Stevens interview, defense attorneys moved that charges against Ray and Peggy Bucky be dismissed, but Judge Pounders denied the motion. Jury selection took weeks. The 12 finally selected included 8 males and 4 females. Half of the jurors were white, 3 African American, 2 Asian, and 1 Hispanic. All but 2 jurors had at least some college education. Defense attorneys said later they were pleased with the jury. In many ways, the trial was a condensed version of the preliminary hearing, while the prosecution attempted to prove widespread sexual abuse of McMartin children. The defense tried to prove that the whole show was driven by the suggestive and overzealous interview techniques of the crusading therapist of the CII. In addition to featuring 2 rather than 7 defendants, there were fewer charges, fewer attorneys, and fewer witnesses. Still, by any measure, it was a major trial. Before it was over, the prosecution would present 61 witnesses, including 9 child witnesses, a jailhouse informant, parents, medical specialists, therapists, and even a woman who had sexual relations with Ray Bucky. Unbelievable and unreal. Opening statements in the McMartin trial began on July 14, 1987. Deputy District Attorney Leo Rubin characterized the trial as one about the betrayal of trust. Dean Gitz, attorney for Peggy Bucky, described a case in which the children, the parents, and the McMartin teachers were all victims of an overzealous prosecutor. I totally agree. He told the jurors to consider that the McMartin preschool operated for 20 years without complaints, and that the prosecution, despite moving heaven and earth in search for secret tunnels, pornographic pictures, semen, and buried animals, had turned up no hard evidence of any sexual molestation. Daniel Davis, attorney for Ray Buckley, said that he would offer a common sense defense that would show his client to be victim of suggested interviewing techniques and a virtual witch hunt. The prosecution produced several parent witnesses to lay a foundation for the accounts of the children that would follow. Typically, a parent would testify that prior to the infamous letter of Chief Cole Myers announcing that Ray Buckley was suspected of child abuse, he or she had no reason to suspect that his or her child had been molested. After taking the children to CII and talking with Key McFarland, however, the parents became convinced that their children had been sexually abused. Parents suggested that bladder infections, nightmares, anatomically correct artwork, or masturbation were all confirming evidence of abuse. A couple of parents theorized that the massive abuse might have occurred during nap time when parents were prohibited from picking up their children. The prosecution's child witnesses, ranging in age from 8 to 15, repeated many of their stories from the preliminary hearing. Jurors heard of the naked movie star game, Ray Bucky scaring the children into silence by executing a cat with a knife, and numerous rapid accounts of sexual abuse by Ray and Peggy Bucky. On cross-examination, the defense went to the tapes. It countered with evidence of contradictions between filed testimony and testimony at the preliminary hearing. Videotape interviews in which the children denied that they were molested, and CII interviews revealing McFarland coaching children and rewarding right answers. McFarland, was paying for these children to kind of make up this story. Just awful. The defense tried to produce a child witness of its own, the young boy who started the whole investigation rolling, the son of Judy Johnson. With Judy Johnson now deceased, the boy's father flatly told reporters that his son would testify over my dead body. Judge Pounders agreed that with Johnson, the trial testimony might prove too stressful for his son and declared the boy legally unavailable as a witness. Perhaps the key witness in the trial was the CII therapist, Key McFarland. In her 5 weeks on the stand, McFarland fought to defend her controversial interview techniques that included naked puppets, anatomically correct dolls, and telling children what other children had previously reported about sexual abuse at the McMartin school. Before McFarland finished her lengthy testimony, even Judge Pounders was expressing concern about her techniques. Outside of the presence of the jury, Pounders declared, "In my view, her credibility is becoming more of an issue as she testifies here." Defense expert Dr. Michael Maloney, professor of psychiatry at USC, further discredited McFarland's interview techniques. Maloney criticized the techniques as presenting children with a script that discouraged spontaneous information and instead encouraged the children to supply expected answers to please mother and father and prove themselves good detectives. Another distinct weakness in the prosecution's case was the lack of medical evidence of sexual abuse. Although Dr. Astrid Heger testified that she found numerous scars consistent with rape, the defense's medical expert, Dr. David Paul, said that his review of the medical evidence turned up virtually no evidence of molestation. In the case of 9 of the 11 alleged victims, Paul found the body parts to be perfectly normal. Perhaps the strangest testimony at the time came from jailhouse informant George Freeman, Ray Bucky's cellmate and a 9-time felon and confessed perjurer. Freeman testified that Bucky had admitted to him that he sexually molested children at the McMartin school and elsewhere, had a long-standing incestuous relationship with his sister, shipped pornographic material to Denmark, and had buried incriminating photos of himself and children in South Dakota. Powerful evidence if true, but the defense succeeded in showing that Freeman had almost zero credibility. Now it says a word about pyramids. Ray Bucky was a believer in pyramid power, which he said has a powerful effect on all living things. The prosecution wanted jurors to know about Buckley's fascination with pyramids. They wanted them to know that Bucky drove around Los Angeles wearing a pyramid hat and that he hung a pyramid over his bed. The prosecution argued that the pyramid evidence undercut Peggy Bucky's argument that she would never hire an unfit teacher at the McMartin preschool. Prosecutors also argued that the pyramid obsession made more credible one child's testimony that Ray was involved in satanic-like rituals. Judge Ponders agreed to let the juror hear the pyramid evidence. A personal note: the actual pyramid hat in the Bucky trial now resides in my office. It came boxed in a set of trial records and exhibits donated to the UMKC Law School by Bucky's defense firm. I almost never wear the hat. Pyramids were connected to another goal of the prosecution. The prosecution wanted to show that Bucky did not have normal sexual relations with women and therefore they contended was more likely to be a pedophile. Investigators from the DA's office tracked down a Montana woman who had met Bucky at a pyramid convention in Reno 7 years earlier. The woman told investigators that she tried to seduce Bucky, but that her attempts were unsuccessful. Unfortunately for the prosecution, the strategy backfired. After talking with defense lawyers, the woman, Barbara Goals, changed her story. Called as a defense witness, she testified that she lied to investigators to protect my reputation, quote unquote. Goals said she was about to be married at the time and had her fiance and future children to think about. Goals told jurors that the truth was she did indeed have sexual relations with Bucky at the Fantasy Inn in South Lake Tahoe. She also testified that after watching Bucky interact with small children, she was sure that there was no possibility that Bucky could have molested children. After her testimony, prosecutor Blair Ruman fumed. "She's lying," she told reporters. "This lady is straight out of Central Casting." That's what she said. Media attention peaked when the defendants themselves took the stand. When asked whether she ever molested those children, Peggy said, "Never." Ray also denied each and every prosecution charge, including ones the defense saw as ridiculous. He denied, for example, ever killing a horse with a baseball bat, as one child testified. Unbelievable. He noted that he was not even teaching at the school during many of the times in which he was accused of abusing children. In cross-examination, prosecutor Leah Rubin kept hammering Bucky with questions that some saw as irrelevant. She succeeded in getting Bucky to admit that sometimes he did not wear underwear. Ooh, he went commando once in a while, and that he owned several sexually explicit adult magazines. She also accused Bucky of fabricating his sexual relationship with goals in order to hide his attraction to children. What else did she get him to admit? On November 2nd, 1989, after nearly 30 months of testimony, the case went to jury. The jury spent another 2.5 months deliberating its verdicts. On 52 of the 65 charges against the two defendants, some charges were dropped during the trial, including all of the charges against Peggy Bucky. The jury returned an acquittal. On the 13 remaining charges against Ray Bucky, the jury announced that it was hopelessly deadlocked. Jury foreperson Louis Chang explained the vote. The interview tapes were too biased, too leading. That's the main crux of it. Another juror told reporters, "Whether I believe he did it and whether it was proven are very different." Judge Pounders offered his own appraisal of the verdict. "I was not surprised by the verdict. I would not have been surprised at any decision the jury made." Aftermath and second trial. Child protection groups and parents pressured prosecutors to retry Ray Bucky on the charges on which the first jury deadlocked. 500 people, including many McMartin parents, marched through the streets of Manhattan Beach carrying signs such as "We believe the children." One McMartin parent called the verdict in the first trial a crime almost equal to the crime that occurred outside the courtroom. A television poll showed 87% of respondents thought the Buckys were guilty. Wow, that's horrible. District Attorney Ira Reiner signed off on the retrial. 2 new prosecutors were assigned to the case, Joe Martinez and Camila Ferrero. The second trial also saw a new judge following a successful motion by defense attorney Daniel Davis to have Judge Pounders removed from the case. Pounders expressed relief at the development. "I'm finally free. After 3 years and 3 months, I was honestly afraid I couldn't live through it." Superior Court Judge Stanley Weinsberg was assigned to replace Pounders. The second trial was a much more focused proceeding involving only 8 counts of molestation and 3 children. The prosecution presented its entire case in just 13 days compared to 15 months in the first trial, and offered only 11 witnesses. One of the witnesses was a mother of 2 who was on the stand and glared at Ray Bucky and announced, "I'm so angry at you, I could kill you right now." The prosecution chose not to call CII interviewer Kay McFarland. Instead, McFarland was called as a defense witness. Jury deliberations after the 3-month trial were described by one juror as excruciating. The jury ended its deliberations deadlocked on all 8 counts. Again, the jury leaned toward an acquittal on all 6 of the counts and leaned toward conviction only on 1 count. Following the mistrial, District Attorney Reiner chose not to retry Bucky a third time and all charges against him were dismissed. The DA's decision did not mean, of course, that Ray Bucky was innocent of all charges. On that question, we might say the jury will forever be out. The McMartin preschool abuse trial was costly in many ways. In monetary terms, it cost the taxpayer over $15 million. For the defendants, the cost of the trial included long terms in jail. Ray Bucky spent 5 years in jail before being released on bail, loss of homes, loss of jobs, loss of life savings, and a stigma that might never leave. The children, too, were victims. Ray Bucky, in a CBS interview, said, "Those poor children went to hell, but I'm not the cause of their hell, and neither is my mother. The cause of their hell is the adults who took this case and made it what it was." Parents, too, suffered. Many felt betrayed by the justice system. The community of Manhattan Beach was another victim, left uneasy and polarized by the long investigation and judicial proceedings. The effects of the McMartin trial even extended beyond the state of California. Across the country, daycare providers resisted the temptation to hug or touch children. Contact almost all child experts say children need out of fear that their actions might be interpreted as signs of abuse. Many daycare centers were forced to close their doors after insurance companies, fearing molestation lawsuits, dramatically raised liability insurance rates. Early publicity surrounding the McMartin investigation also spawned a rash of charges against daycare providers elsewhere, many of which proved to be unsubstantiated. And I also wanted to say this as well. This is kind of like with me putting on my tinfoil hat again. I think that there was such a pressure to kind of get rid of daycares and to have this happen to daycares because women were entering the workforce. Not to say that they weren't working before. No, they were always working. But I think that this attack on daycares, even we see this today, that there's so many instances where people are anti-daycare because they would prefer that children stay home and be raised by their mothers. They don't really want women to kind of leave the home and to leave their children in the care of others. This is just, again, my tinfoil hat and how patriarchy likes to tear communities up. And they do it this way. They do it the way of kind of making it so that she doesn't have community. She doesn't have community. She doesn't have help. All she has is her reliance upon him. And he doesn't even want to be involved. So it's just so weird how there's all of a sudden, or this case was like the catalyst for daycares to kind of close down throughout the country. You know, I don't think it was an accident. I think that this was very deliberate. This was very calculated, and it just kind of forced women to kind of not or be fearful of daycare centers altogether, which, you know, parents should be fearful. They should always be fearful of where they, you know, put their children. But what happened with the McMartin preschool trial is that everyone kind of said, no more daycares, we have to find something else to do. So I think that's something also to think about as well. So to close out this article, it says there are many lessons to be learned from the McMartin preschool trial. When the Manhattan police chief sent his letter warning of possible abuse at the school, he should have known that hysteria, massive press attention, and pressure to convict at all costs would follow. The case also illustrates the problems that come when police and prosecutors leap to conclusions. Blinders get put on. Evidence that normally might cause a re-examination of assumptions get ignored. There are lessons for police and prosecutors, but there are also lessons for the media. The McMartin case was hounded by packed journalists publishing stories slanted heavily toward the prosecution. The journalists churned out sensational headlines day after day and almost never seriously questioned allegations. Their actions helped turn the McMartin trial into the expensive fiasco that it became. Finally, there was collateral damage. In the wake of McMartin and other trials, many daycare centers around the country adopted new policies. These policies strictly limited physical contact between teachers and children. Every parent knows that there are times when a child needs a hug, and often because of McMartin, the hugs weren't there. So we just went over that huge mess, and you saw for yourself how one individual turned this entire community upside down. And the entire time that this trial went on, the original person that accused these people, they passed away, right? The 2 or 3 year old boy, nothing happened. He couldn't even identify Ray Bucky. And it's just a mess. But it goes to show you that when a group of people decide to get together to co-sign on one belief, you don't know where that belief can kind of go after that. It just snowballs into this madness. And this is what we see in regards to religion and spirituality and demonic activity, because even today, the satanic panic, some people say that it's gone. A lot of people say that it never left, and it just spread like wildfire, with people actually believing in these entities and these stories and these conspiracies. So now you have this situation where what if there were people out there that were doing nefarious things to children and to harm them? Instead of you looking for those people to prosecute them, you just write it off as something spiritual that you kind of have to pray away. So this is why I am such a big anti-spiritualist, because what it does is it keeps you in that land of delusion, and it makes you not act with your physical self. Like you never avenge what's happening to you, because you spiritually are trying to take care of a physical problem. Similar to like what I spoke about earlier about these girls, and they're selling spiritual baths and they're selling these spiritual oils in an attempt to help people with physical problems, i.e., you're lacking, breakthroughs in your life, you lack money. Like the physical thing to do if you lack money would be to apply for a job, or to look for a job, or to get a better education so that you can get a better job. Instead of telling people what to do physically, they kind of make it so that women and everyone can just pray things away. Pray people away, pray situations away, and make sure that you're spiritually connected, and just forget the physical for now. So you do have a lot of people who are spiritual, and then when you look at them, they're not even healthy. So what are you spiritual for if you're not even taking care of your physical person? The belief or the reason behind that is because people believe that after you pass away, there's something else. And they've been conditioned to believe that, and they've been conditioned to be preoccupied with the spirit, with the soul, with things that we can't see, with things that men invented to get us away from reality. Because it makes sense that he would set himself up as the individual to kind of put the spirit on paper and then have everyone believe in it, and then make it so that your entire life is dedicated to you safeguarding this spirit and being obsessed with this spirit, and always looking to spiritually fix yourself. Because when you're looking to spiritually fix yourself, you're always going to be paying out. Whether you pay someone for a reading, whether you pay someone for a tarot spread, whether you pay someone for a spiritual bath or a candle, or to hex a woman because she slept with your boyfriend, you will forever be a paying consumer when you deal with things of the spirit and the soul and things that you cannot see. And this is what he knows. This is what he knows. This is why he invented God. This is why he invented the devil. He knew that people would pay out of the wazoo so that they can get salvation. So here you are paying physical dollars to a spiritual being. You see how ridiculous that is? You see how dumb that is? But I don't think people sit down and have these thoughts, or maybe they do have these thoughts, but then they try to separate themselves from these main patriarchal religions, but they are still participating in the spiritual aspect of these religions and these spiritual undertones of these religious beliefs. So yeah, you're a spiritualist and you're new age, and you have a tarot card deck and you can do a birth reading, but you're still over there talking about demons. Yeah, demons is a Christian concept. We could look far back as the Roman Empire to see that the belief in demons and the belief in the devil and the belief in God, all of that is Christianity. So you can't be one thing without the other. But let me know what you think about that. I think that this was a good live. I may do a part 2. I don't know if I'm going to do a part 2, but I may get into like more historical knowledge in regards to like not the satanic panic, but other things that I think should be discussed. Like spiritual capitalism is one of my most favorite topics. Twin flames is another one of my most favorite topics, especially since that documentary came out on twin flames that's on all over Netflix or something like that. I love the fact that that came out because it shows you women are so desperate for love that they actually believe that they have this soul tie or this spiritual connection with this stranger who they haven't met yet. And then you have people who actually perpetuate those beliefs, and they kind of teach them how to bring this soul tie to your front door, how to get the love of your life to kind of find you so that you can run off into the sunset and get married. It's all bullshit, in my opinion. And we saw that with the twin flame documentary, and how this couple, they were able to not steal, but they were able to get away with, millions of dollars from people who they finessed into believing that they were these twin flames. No proof whatsoever to prove that the soul exists or the spirit exists, but they went around and they told people that they were twin flames when in actuality they were business partners. Lovers, but also business partners. And when you're a business partner and you have a business to run, you will sell bullshit to people if it means keeping you very wealthy and very comfortable, right? So get into the comment section, like, share, subscribe. Thank you for listening. Take care.